the whole occasion of them writing this is the fact that this scheme was abused and accessed illegally to kill a 32-week-old baby, not to mention the literally hundreds of women every month who have to go to hospital to have their abortions completed because the pills by post only half did the job. Okay, not to mention this catalogue of sort of collateral damage, even aside from the taking of innocent life of the babies, just the effect on the mothers, the cost on the NHS picking up the pieces. Just you just see how ideologically driven and in fact blinded these people are. They could even have the audacity to say such thing, but they say it's one of the greatest advances since abortion care. Again, notice that euphemism, abortion care. Who's being cared for here? Definitely not the baby, certainly not the mother. Hello everyone and welcome to this week's episode of About Abortion. I'm delighted to be joined once again by Tim Lewis. Hello Tim.
Hi Dave, good to see you, good to be with everyone today.
Thanks so much for joining us after a week's holiday. Is holiday a bit generous given what you've been no doubt wrestling with?
Yeah, it was nice, it was good to get away, a change of scene. It's probably as much rust and wind as sun, but yeah, no, it was good.
Good. Well, thanks for coming on today. We're going to be picking up some big news stuff in a few moments. People may have heard of the case of Carla Foster. We've talked about it a bit here and there, and that's come back into the sort of public space again. We'll get onto that in a moment. But before that, just want to highlight a few things that have been going on over the last week. They say a week's a long time in politics. It's certainly been a long time in the life of our organisation. For those who didn't see last week, my friend and colleague Christian Hacking, who's been on this podcast a number of times, Christian Hacking had a debate with Anne Furady. Anne Furady is the ex-chief of BPAS, the main abortion provider in the UK, and they had a debate down in Guildford. I don't know, Tim, if you managed to see that yet. Have you seen Christian versus?
Holiday, I haven't caught up with it yet, though, Dave. But I
no. Well, it was a terrific debate. I think the caption is a debate like no other, and really it's true because what the angle Christian took there was, perhaps above all else, was a heartfelt plea to Anne Furady to repent and to see the error of her ways and her standing before a holy and just God. And it was a very sort of meaningful, sincere call to her to think afresh. So it was kind of quite a personal debate in a sense. And but I think Christian did very, very well. And to her credit, I think Anne Furady, unlike almost anyone else who advocates for abortion, is at least prepared to stand up and speak relatively straightforwardly and honestly. I have to say, I mean, we'll no doubt do some analysis of the debate in due course, but she lays it out pretty bare for us to kind of to examine. So if folks haven't listened to that, please do go. I'll put a link in this video notes. Do go and listen to that debate and share it. It really is worth your time. Another thing that has been happening over the last week, we had our largest ever coordinated national display on Saturday. 5 CBR UK public education teams around the country, including our one in Norwich. So if you're not following our Facebook page or following us on Instagram yet, do go and find CBR UK on those platforms and you'll see some really interesting photos and videos. We had a really interesting time in Norwich, which we'll come back to at some point, because it so happens to coincide with the Pride March as well locally. So it was quite interesting engaging with the marchers and the supporters of that march and seeing how they responded to our pictures and so on. So do go and find those, and we'll bring some videos and some conversations to the table here in this podcast in weeks to come. But all that to say, lots been going on, and not least what's been going on with Carla Foster. So Tim, can you kick us off with For someone who's not aware of this at all, what are we talking about? Who's Carla Foster? What's been going on? And why is it hitting the headlines once again?
So Carla Foster was a lady who during during lockdown, this was so when lockdown was all ongoing and everything was quite new for people. She as I understand it, the personal circumstances around her case, she has, I think, believe 3 children, and she'd with a previous partner, she'd then moved out, and she'd become pregnant with the child of someone else, so another man. And then I think when lockdown occurred, she moved back in with her previous partner. I think this is the right sequence of events, and so found herself back with a previous partner with carrying another man's child. Decided at that point that she wanted to abort the child, and ordered pills by post. So I think we'd all agree that a tragic set of events, a turn of events for a pro-life person. The thing that made this case different, and I suppose exposed the issue with the pills by post situation, is this child when it was killed was quite a long way beyond the age of past the point of viability and past the point actually at which these legally these pills by post abortion was sort of legal in this country. So the baby was over 30 weeks gestation, well over 30 weeks gestation, so well beyond the 24-week usual limit, and well beyond the limit for these pills by post. So that is why it happened sometime after, obviously, lockdown. That is why Carla Foster was eventually prosecuted for the destruction of her child, and was originally sentenced to 14 months in prison for that offence, for that crime, which we would say killing a child at whatever stage of life in the womb is wrong. But obviously this fell under the legal parameters of what was deemed wrong within our nation, and so she was subsequently prosecuted, and obviously a difficult case, and she had children she was leaving behind when she went to prison for these 14 months. But the judge, the original judge, was a guy called Justice Pepperell. Is that
That's
right,
it. Yeah.
Dave? So he handed down the sentence, and then basically what happened was subsequently there was appeals, and so it was eventually overturned, this decision. So after just I think she served 1 month or just slightly under in prison, she was then released and given a 14-month suspended sentence. So a different set of judges, Dame Victoria Sharp, Lord Justice Holroyd, Mrs. Justice Lambert, basically overturned that case on appeal. Dame Victoria said it's a case that calls for compassion, not punishment, and that there was no useful purpose, again a direct quote, served by detaining Carla Foster in custody, and went on to detail exceptionally strong mitigations, really regarded her children, the fact that she shouldn't have been separated from her children and she hadn't had access rights to them up to that point of 1 month in prison. I mean, one of the barristers said, I thought rather extraordinarily, that if she hadn't admitted what she'd done to the police, she would never have been prosecuted, which may well be true, but one wonders on what grounds is that a defence for most crimes. If you just admit to it, then you get away with things. So this is really the nature of the case, and of course the kind of abortion lobby cheerleaders. So we're talking about BPAS. BPAS is Claire Murphy, delighted with this verdict, that this cruel, antiquated law does not reflect the values of society today, which actually we'll see in a moment that there is very little public support to extend the time at which abortion is legally available. And it goes on to kind of claim that this is the reason why abortion law needs to be even further liberalised. And Stella Creasy, pro-abortion MP, who's got a lot of blood on her hands, also said, this was a great victory against this archaic thing, but actually that there was more similar cases coming, which would cover the sort of lockdown period where women had aborted their children beyond the legal limits. I should say, of course, that the original government decision, or the original Crown prosecution decision, was sort of defended by the government, someone called Robert Price from the Crown Prosecution Service, said the original sentence was not manifestly excessive, and that the judge had, again, direct quote, correctly made allowances for mitigating factors in this unusually sensitive case. Someone called Robert Price. Catherine Robertson from Right to Life obviously raised what we're going to raise, that obviously, this draws attention to the wrongness of abortion generally. Of course, this would never have happened if pills by post had not been carried on, it would have happened, but obviously the government U-turned on making this a COVID temporary measure. So we're going to see more and more of this thing, and this was a child at 32 weeks, around 8 months gestation. The baby was a fully formed human child, and as Catherine Robinson points out, if her mother had been given an in-person appointment at BPAS, she would be still alive, this child, because she wouldn't have been able to obtain an abortion at that stage of gestation. So that's the case we're talking about today, Dave, for folks who are unaware.
Yeah, thank you. And the baby, of course, has a name, doesn't she? Lily is the name of that baby. And for anyone who wants to get more of the details of the original situation, what actually took place, and the original sentencing remarks, they are publicly available. Justice Pepperell's remarks are publicly available. I'll put, again, those in the notes as well. And what's quite interesting, I mean, it's a really helpful account of what took place with quite a detailed chronology. What's quite interesting, and this is the fact that we're really focusing on today in particular, because this is why it's hit the headlines again a few weeks after the initial sentence, was, of course, because of this appeal. Now, interestingly, in the initial sentencing under Justice Pepperell, I'll read this to you, direct quote from his sentencing remarks. We can see that the abortion lobby already had a go at trying to sway the courts really quite inappropriately. And one is reminded of what happened early on in the pandemic with the pills by post, a sort of double U-turn from the government, where the government said we're not going to change. Though they said initially, yeah, we're going to introduce this. They were challenged immediately, said no, we're not going to introduce pills by post. We've got to carry on as we have up till now. And then they U-turned again because the abortion lobby slapped them on the wrist and they did what they were told. And we're seeing history repeats itself here. So listen to what happened first time round under Justice Pepperell. This is what he writes. Unusually, the court has received a letter dated 6th of April 2023 from the President of the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, the Chief Executive of the Royal College of Midwives, the President of the Faculty of Sexual and Reproductive Healthcare, the President of the Faculty of Public Health, the Chair of the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists Abortion Task Force, the clinical lead and clinical representative for the abortion care guideline developed by the National Institute for Health Care Excellence, and the co-chair of the British Society of Adoption and Care Providers. These eminent professionals argue that the successful introduction of the telemedicine option was one of the single greatest advances since abortion care was legalised by the 1967 Act. Let's just pause there. Quite an astonishingly brazen claim there that this telemedicine option, which the whole occasion of them writing this is the fact that this scheme was abused and accessed illegally to kill a 32-week-old baby, not to mention the literally hundreds of women every month who have to go to hospital to have their abortions completed because the pills by post only half did the job. Okay, not to mention this catalogue of sort of collateral damage, even aside from the taking of innocent life of the babies, just the effect on the mothers, the cost on the NHS picking up the pieces. Just you just see how ideologically driven and in fact blinded these people are. They could even have the audacity to say such a thing, but they say it's one of the greatest advances since abortion care. Again, notice that euphemism, abortion care. Who's being cared for here? Definitely not the baby, certainly not the mother. Was legalised by the 67 Act. Anyway, they explained that telemedicine has transformed the care for some of the most vulnerable women and girls. Well, certainly transformed it. Girls who find it difficult to access in-person medical services. Such patients include women and girls at serious risk of harm, whether from a coercive partner or other family member, and those who are isolated in rural communities. The letter urges a non-custodial sentence and indicates that its authors are concerned that your imprisonment might deter other women from accessing telemedical abortion services and other late gestation women from seeking medical care or from being open and honest with medical professionals. The letter also regrets a recent increase in investigations following late gestation deliveries, and even suggests that one of the letter's authors might appear before the court to present their plea in person. And then the judge goes on to say it would plainly not have been appropriate to have allowed any of the authors to address the court. Indeed, I consider that it would have been better if the letter had not been written at all. So a very clear response there from the judge saying this is inappropriate, don't try and sway the courts. And for those who aren't aware of that sort of list of professional bodies, those are known pro-abortion bodies. The Royal Colleges of Obs and Gynae, of midwives, have been totally taken over by the abortion lobby. Interestingly, BPAS didn't list themselves there. They at least had enough sense not to show their hand in the writing of the letter, given that they were very closely behind the criminality, really, of this case. But it's just very interesting that they had a go once, they were slapped on the wrist, and they came back again. And this time they prevailed. And it just shows the persistence of the abortion lobby and really the contempt they show for rule of law and for consistency being upheld. They just don't want any criticism or pushback against abortion at all.
I mean, absolutely. These people are ideologically driven. They are what they want. They want more babies killed. They want them killed quicker. They want them killed with less and less safeguards. That is what's driving it. All this language about choice, all this language about women's rights, it is a complete and utter smokescreen. It is a lie from the pit of hell, quite honestly. These people, as I said, they have blood on their hands and they are driven ideologically by this bloodlust to kill as many children as they want. Think of any other people group where medical professionals, politicians, clamoring to have a vulnerable, a weak people group done away with, dispatched with greater ease, with greater efficiency, with less and less stuff. No politics would be allowed that. Hate speech would be, putting it mildly, it would be incitement to violence, it would be terror. These people would be directed to prevent and all sorts of things, But this is what we're seeing: this complete dehumanization of children because they happen to be in the wombs of their mother. And the end game is to remove all safeguards and to have abortion on demand for any reason up to birth, up to 40 weeks, of course, beyond 40 weeks gestation, because babies don't always come on time. That is their end game. That's what needs to be called out. It's an infanticide that is gripping our nation, and this is the ugly reality of it. And you're quite right. They just keep going. They just keep going. They are so driven. They are so driven by the sort of the spiritual forces in the heavenly places, we would say as Christians, that they just keep coming back. And we saw it with the government double U-turn on COVID pills by post. We've seen it now. If they get a sentence they don't like, they just come back, and lo and behold, it's repealed in fairly short order. I was reading a couple. Let me just show you a couple of things, a couple of quotes. Really, I was reading a couple of years ago, 2-3 years ago. Pope Francis released an encyclical and called Fratelli Tutti, so all brothers, about the brotherhood of mankind, really humankind. And he talks a little bit, and he writes a little bit in it about the rule of law and what happens when a society degenerates, as it has in the case of ours, really, where it can no longer see good and evil, or it calls good evil and evil good. That's what the Bible says in Isaiah 5. This is what Pope Francis says, and he's quoting actually a previous encyclical. When the culture itself is corrupt, and objective truth and universally valid principles are no longer upheld, then laws can only be seen as arbitrary impositions or obstacles to be avoided. And that's exactly what we see with these characters from BPAS, from the RCOG. They don't care about the truth. They don't care about right and wrong. They don't care about universally valid principles. They just care about killing more children. And any obstacle to that, and they're furious, and that was Pope Francis. We could look at Psalm 94, verses 20 to 21. Can wicked rulers be allied with you? Those who frame injustice by statutes? They band together against the life of the righteous and condemn the innocent to death, literally innocent blood. I mean, you know, this is what we're seeing, unfortunately, Dave, in our country. It is a genocide, and it's a genocide being done through through legal means, and all the time pushing. And even when there's a little bit of pushback, that's not tolerated.
It really is reaching kind of fever pitch, isn't it? This bloodlust, because when they get a verdict they don't like, or when they, let's face it, when they've been caught red-handed, the abortion providers gave pills to a woman who was not just what, 8 weeks above or 10 weeks above the legal limit, full stop, for outside of cases of fetal abnormality or whatever. Not only was this above the legal limit by about 8 weeks, this was above the medical suggested limit for those pills by what, 22 weeks or something, by 20 weeks. This is well above. It was medically reckless. Even if you don't care about the baby, even if you only care about the woman, how on earth could you have the audacity to provide pills illegally and medically? It was on medical negligence. And then the next thing they do, rather than saying mea culpa, we dropped the ball on that one, they turn around and use that as an occasion to campaign for full decriminalisation. They want more of this. They want more Carla Fosters. They want more Lily Fosters. Absolutely. They want more late-term abortions in homes with no medical care. They want it right up till birth. They want more of the same. And it's that sort of, not only is it just sort of contempt for rule of law, but there's a kind of blindness here, and we read about this, don't we, in Scripture, the sort of continual lust for more, sort of losing your head, and just and not even aware really of where the public temperature is at, because actually even secular, even pro-choice voices on the media, Good Morning Britain, or in the papers, were saying, hang on a second, this is a 32-week baby, this is not okay. They're way out of touch with public opinion, campaigning for more. And again, this is almost, and you can see the media training these guys have given each other, because whatever happens, the end of the sentence is, and this is why we need full decriminalisation, we need to take away all restrictions, no matter what's just happened, even if a 32-week baby's been killed and a mother could have died as well.
You almost think they kind of probably regret the fact the baby wasn't 39 weeks or 40 weeks, because then they would have, it would have proved their point, wouldn't it? But this is the extraordinary thing about this. Dame Victoria Sharp tells the court there's no useful purpose. Well, that's like saying I get sent to prison for killing someone. Well, there's no useful purpose in doing it. It, apart from the fact it's a punishment, it's a deterrent for others who might be tempted to bump someone off. That is how these things work. This is how, so the fact is that they are opening the floodgates, I think. They kind of allude to the fact that we're going to see more and more of these cases, but you almost think, well, actually, that's kind of what they want, because they've removed any safeguards, and they've kind of given a green light, Dave. They've kind of given a green light to destroying fully formed, viable, healthy infants. They've basically said, well, this can be treated with impunity, really, because even if you get prosecuted, you'd be out in 4 weeks. But we're working on that. We're working on that. So,
thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of About Abortion. I hope you're appreciating these podcasts, and if you are, can I ask for your help in getting these vital messages to more people? We're delighted that we can get these to people free of charge. But that's not free for us to produce. It costs something like £300 to £400 a month to get these podcasts produced. And I wonder if you could help us, partner with us financially. Many of us will have an Amazon Prime subscription or some kind of streaming platform to the tune of £6, £7, £8 a month. I wonder if you consider, as it were, taking out a subscription with us. If you could donate, say, £8 a month, if we had about 40 people donating around £8 a month, just £8 a month, that would help us to continue to do these podcasts free of charge for anyone who wants to listen in. And this is the only podcast specifically about abortion in the UK. It's the greatest injustice, not only of our time, but in all history. Would you help us to bring these life-saving messages to more people. And don't forget to like, share, comment, subscribe. Do send this in particular to your church leaders and anyone else you think might be interested. Thank you so much for your support, and I'll let you get back to the episode now. It sets a very dangerous precedent, doesn't it? Because what you've got with the abortion law currently, the Abortion Act 67, everyone knows it's a bit of a farce, really, because technically it's meant to be 2 doctors sign off. They've got to be sort of quasi-medical grounds. And everyone knows it's a tick box exercise, because when's the last time anyone got prosecuted or got denied an abortion up to 24 weeks? It just doesn't happen. It's available on demand. And so effectively these grounds, A, B, C, D, whatever, it's a formality at best. And what we're seeing now, as you say, is an extension of that. If, as has just happened, Carla has been released from prison, the message going out there is, hey, the 24-week limit doesn't mean anything either. Who cares about that? Nothing will happen to you, even if you have an abortion after that limit, even if it's at home, even if you lied to get hold of the pills and you knowingly broke the law, as she did. And again, the sentencing remarks are very clear about that. So it's very important to see here that, someone said the law without consequences is just good advice. We must not get sucked into this idea that, to punish someone is so uncaring, it's so unloving. The kind of special pleading at play here is just outrageous. It's as if, as an aside, they're just suggesting, well, prison never does any good anyway. It's like, well, hold the phone. I mean, okay, we can have a debate about what punishments are most appropriate, but you can't just overthrow the concept of imprisonment because this particular case doesn't suit your ideologies or your kind of your politics. And so the special pleading, I think we really need to sit up and pay attention here, because if they can do it with this issue, what else can they do it with? And actually, rule of law is quite an important thing. It's kind of one of the main foundations of a functioning society. And I think everyone should shudder at the idea of laws being treated with such contempt and sort of just vacuous assertions like, well, I saw online someone saying, when has it ever done any good to put a woman in prison? Or, how can it ever be helpful to society for a woman to be in prison? Now, you can understand to some extent the sentiment at play there, but what's the next thing you're going to say? If you're female, you have impunity. Or if you're a mother, you can commit crimes. Where does this lead? Society falls apart very quickly if you start saying that certain people are effectively immune from punishment.
And from a Christian perspective, Romans 13 is very clear that the governing authorities, God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain. So the government is there. The burden of Romans 13 is that legitimate authority punishes evil, punishes wrongdoing, and promotes the common good, promotes virtue, tries to hold back vice. And within that framework, protects the weak, protects the vulnerable. It seems to me, occurs to me, what we've got here is kind of the opposite of that. We're attacking the weak and the vulnerable. We're promoting evil, and we're holding back any attempts to kind of mitigate that, to put safeguards in place. And this is, this is why our society, our culture is in such a mess, because we've kind of given 2 fingers to God and we've said we're going to do things our way, and this is the result, really. Over 220 odd thousand children killed every year doing things our way. So from a Christian viewpoint, of course the governing authority is there to try and withhold evil as much as possible and promote good, protect the weak, protect the vulnerable. That's just that's standard sort of theology, really.
And there's an important point here which we have to keep going back to, which is this whole concept of legislating morality. Christians get very shaky when it comes to the idea of writing laws and enforcing them to encourage or discourage certain behaviours. There's a very poorly thought through, sort of half-baked notion that it's somehow unkind to impose your morality on others. It's arrogant, it's narrow-minded. The loving thing is just to let people get on with their own sort of moral framework and not be so bigoted as to think that we can use the Bible to generate moral codes for others, and it's a real problem because we've swallowed a whole load of worldly thinking there, and that's really where I want to go with the rest of this episode is actually looking at how the world is infiltrating the church, and we see the issues we see it play out here in society. We also see in the church, and there's a real lack of clarity at best when it comes to legislating morality. The reality is, as one guest said on the podcast a while ago, Lennox, I think he put it very well. He said the question is not whether or not you're going to legislate morality. The question is whose morality are you going to legislate? And what we're seeing here is wicked people are trying to legislate wickedness, as you read from the Psalm. They're trying to legislate, frame injustice by statute. They're trying to write evil laws, and guess what? Evil laws encourage evil behavior, and if we've got it bad now, imagine how bad they want it to be by taking away all safeguards altogether. And actually, if the church does not stand up and speak up, we are deeply complicit in that. What we're seeing here is some of the fruit of our rapid retreat from the public square, from the courts, from politics. And we've just agreed with this kind of secular settlement. We'll go and bury ourselves in a corner somewhere and maybe whisper very quietly to each other what our personal beliefs are, but we wouldn't dare impose that on others, because who are we to say what's right and wrong for them?
And the whole notion that government shouldn't be legislating things that reflect certain moral frame, I mean, it's a nonsense. I mean, that's what's happening all the time. Think about climate change and these, what do they call these low emission zones in London. That's exactly what the government do. They're trying to change behaviour. They're trying to change, very, very concretely change behaviour based on what they deem to be, a set of values, really. So, absolutely right. It just becomes a case of whose morality we're legislating for, and I think obviously we have the Bible, we have the God's standard, the gold standard that is very clear about all these things, and is very clear also about the consequences of going the other direction. Romans 1-16 makes that clear. I do think it's important to say, though, Dave, that just how out of touch some of these ideologically driven bodies, organizations, MPs are with the general public. There's very little appetite, if not any real appetite, to increase the levels at which abortion is already. I mean, I was talking, so just a kind of personal anecdote. So I was talking to my sister-in-law who's French recently about these things, and she wasn't speaking particularly from a faith perspective, really. But she was shocked. She was visibly shocked when I told her what UK abortion law was currently. So not what BPAS and co want it to be, but what it actually is currently. Because we were talking about the issues around finding out the gender of a child, and how for some communities, or some health trusts, I believe, have stopped that happening in hospitals because they know that certain communities desire baby boys rather than baby girls. So if they find out it's a baby girl, they'll be much more likely to abort that child. And she was, first of all, she was taken back because she was like, well, how can you know the gender at that stage? I said, well, UK law, you can abort up to 24 weeks. And she was shocked. And of course, in France, it's 14 weeks. If you go to Germany, it's 12 weeks. Portugal and many other European nations, it's just 10 weeks. So we have to realize just how out of sync we are with our European brothers and sisters on this. Britain is an outlier, I would suggest, already, and it's wanting to go even more down this kind of path of destruction, really. So I think that is important to say, and I think in conversations with maybe non-Christian folks, or in conversations with folks like MPs who maybe don't accept that Christian framework to start with, to raise some of these things for them, to say, why is it we're so out of sync with the rest of Europe? Why is it that we need to increase what's already a very liberal, very permissive set of guidelines, laws, legislation?
I think in particular the mainstream media are with the general public on this issue, and the vast majority of our political representatives, our members of parliament. That is changing slightly. The 2019 general election did bring in a few more pro-life MPs than there were before, but still the whole tenor of Parliament and of Fleet Street and so on is very pro-abortion. I mean, even the Spectator, which is one of the most conservative libertarian sort of papers we have in the UK had an article entitled "Why Was Carla Foster Ever Sent to Prison?" And there's a really simple answer to that rhetorical question, which is because she broke the law and because she killed a baby. And indeed, if it hadn't been sentencing under the the Offences Against the Person Act, I think she was prosecuted under. Well, it could have been straight infanticide, and there was a debate about whether actually she'd be prosecuted for infanticide, not just destruction of an unborn child. And so it's a really simple answer to that question. She broke the law. She killed a baby with the help of BPAS and others. And so the fact that even The Spectator can publish a piece like that, and you'll find plenty of pro-abortion pieces in the Daily Telegraph and others, we scarcely have a truly socially conservative voice in the British media, and even those who are broadly conservative on some issues, when it comes to something like abortion, they still won't be. And I think it's very important for people to realize that, especially Christians, because it's easy to think, and I've heard people say this, I read a broad spread of media, I try and take in stuff from different ends of the spectrum. The entire spectrum pretty much is pro-abortion when it comes to the media. Okay, there are certain wings where there's at least a space for a pro-life voice, but it's quickly balanced out with a pro-abortion one. And the same is largely true of the political scene. The Conservative Party is certainly not conservative on this issue. Okay, you can survive. You're not driven out of the party for being pro-life. Probably, it's a conscience issue. You're free to vote against abortion, and many Conservative MPs do. But it's been on the Tory watch that we've seen abortion imposed in Northern Ireland. It was on the Tory watch that we had the Pills by Post scheme introduced. And so it doesn't necessarily originate with the Conservative Party, but they rarely stand up to stop any of this stuff. So I'm certainly not saying the Tories are the answer, but the Labour Party is, it might as well be the baby genocide party. Tim, you were mentioning some stats here about, I think, the shadow cabinet and so on. And just give us a little snapshot of just how pro-abortion the Labour Party is. And people need to know this ahead of no doubt an ever closer general election.
Absolutely do. And I think those caveats are important, that the Tories are not, they're not exactly pro-life champions by any stretch. I would give a special dishonourable mention to the Liberal Democrats, actually. I think they're appalling on this. I think it was a guy called Rob Flello, a Catholic candidate they had, who, when they actually realised what he believed about the dignity and humanity of the child in the womb, they deselected and they kicked him out. The SNP, we need to flag up, because Humza Yousaf, he stood on the platform of abortion on demand up to birth. So that is his policy. Absolutely shocking what he's wanting to implement in Scotland. But I think Labour, it needs to be realised, and they need to be called out. A vast number of the real kind of pro-abortion MPs, we're talking about Creasy, Hutt, Johnson, they are being sheltered within the wings of the Labour Party. The Labour Party spent a lot of time kicking out anti-Semites from their party, but they are sheltering people with this kind of vicious rhetoric, this seeming ideological hatred of the unborn child. It's good I think we should say that how both Corbyn and McConnell, okay, they've been kicked out of the Labour Party. Well, I'm not sure McConnell has, but Corbyn has woeful records on votes for this thing. I think Corbyn again still on a platform much like Humza Yousaf's when he was not chosen to lead this country. Keir Starmer at the CPS, he obviously deemed it not in the public interest to prosecute a sex-selective abortion case. Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned Right to Life did a piece showing that the entirety of the shadow cabinet, so the Labour cabinet, is pro-abortion. So the party line may still be, well, this is a conscience issue. Yeah, but is it really? When 29 or something of your MPs, those of you chosen to represent Labour, the Parliamentary Labour Party, are pro-abortion, where are you going to hear an alternative voice? Those pro-life Catholic MPs are going to get, pro-life Labour MPs, some of them are Catholic, some of them are, you're going to get squeezed ever more, out of this. So I would say, historically you're a Labour voter if you're in a kind of a Labour constituency, or there are some Labour values that you cherish and you hold deeply, and I would sympathise with many of them. I would say you need to be talking to your Labour MP or your Labour candidate. You need to be saying how much this matters to you, and how actually you're going to consider not voting for a Labour Party candidate because of their, essentially pro-abortion stance.
Yeah.
I would say that at the moment, a vote for Labour is a vote for abortion. They're functioning almost like the political wing of BPAS or Mary Stopes, much like in America. Democrats have become the political
Yeah.
wing of Planned Parenthood. It's that that the closeness of that alliance. There's nothing between them, and I think we've got a similar thing. Labour is kind of, well, certainly under Corbyn, lurched to the left, and they these policies that they're promoting and wanting to implement are truly awful. And so use your voice, use your democratic rights to raise these issues. If you are a kind of dyed-in-the-wool Labour supporter, then have those conversations and I think ask yourself, examine your conscience. Can you really vote for someone who's gone on record as being pro-abortion, or has voted to extend abortion to Northern Ireland, has voted repeatedly to not lower abortion limits, has voted against sex-selective, voted in favour of sex-selective abortion? Can you really, in your conscience, vote for someone for whom these are the issues that matter to them and that they've put their name against? Really, I think we've got to be really honest with people.
Yeah, and not to mention, of course, the big abortion champions: Stella Creasy, Rupert Huck, Diana Johnson, again, all Labour MPs. And people have sometimes an allergic reaction to this idea of, I don't want to be a single issue voter. Well, I think John Piper put it quite well when he said something along the lines of, a woman who leaves a marriage because she's being physically abused or because her husband repeatedly cheats on her has a single issue marriage. Some issues are big enough that actually they do dominate. They do dictate what happens next. And when there's a genocide going on, guess what? That's an issue big enough to walk out on. And that's certainly been my story in recent elections. Is I'm not going to vote for people who do this or for parties that do this because it is the defining justice issue of our day. We've got just a few minutes left. We need to just very briefly draw the attention now to the church head on. But just before that, I want to mention, we've touched on this, but the way the abortion lobby frames this issue, we mustn't let this wash over us. We keep talking about this as the Carla Foster case. The abortion lobby wants to focus all on the woman, wants to make out that the woman is the primary victim here. And of course, underneath all this, we've got a baby who is the primary victim, Lily Foster. And instead of asking the question, should this woman ever have been sent to prison, we really should be asking a question more like, should Lily have been killed? Or should babies like Lily be protected by law? Shouldn't there be punishments for people who attack babies like Lily? And I think it's very important as Christians, as we digest media and we try and take out the rubbish and keep what's good, one of the things we need to be very careful on is how the whole thing is set up, how it's all framed, who is sort of center in the debate. And I would encourage Christians, whenever we talk about this case, when we think about it, remember the primary victim, and let's not allow the abortion lobby to direct our thoughts to the extent that we're not even asking the right questions. But the final thing I really wanted to kind of focus on here is how many of the issues we're seeing out there in society are indeed in the church as well. I think what was the quote you had there, Tim? This is a case that calls for compassion, not punishment. And I think this idea that compassion, being truly loving, is somehow at odds with punishment. I mean, help us, Tim, just think, how do we see that sort of thing? Have you heard that from Christians? Have you heard that in the church? This idea that, love would never tell someone they're wrong. Love would never, seek to change someone's behavior or restrain their hands from what they want to do. Have you kind of come across that in Christian circles or seen that anywhere?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very common. I think it's, when we talk about compassion, compassion does not of itself wipe out the need for justice.
Mm.
And so one can seek to be compassionate in how one frames legislation, even how one frames a sentence. And it seemed to be that the judge had taken a lot of these mitigating circumstances and factors into his sentence and into how he did that originally. So I think compassion and justice, like love and truth, should not seem to be always in
Mm.
opposition. Certainly in a Christian framework, they're held together, and they're held together supremely in the person of Jesus Christ. But yeah, I mean, I think all the time we see this. I think it's almost an allergic reaction to going anywhere that is deemed to be slightly controversial, that is deemed to be slightly, oh well, this might upset someone, this might offend someone, and
Mm.
ultimately, you basically get to a point where you can't. How can you share the gospel? Because the gospel involves repentance as well as faith. How can you share the Bible? Because the Bible talks about things that our culture wants to celebrate as sinful,
Mm.
and we all know the sort of things that might involve. So yeah, you're buying into this kind of secular mindset that actually, there's this sort of secular neutrality, this myth of secular neutrality, and basically anything that doesn't fall into that is sort of is a bit dodgy, is a bit sort of, well, that's for the private sphere, that's for church, or you need to kind of move out of the step aside, vacate the public square, really. And I think we just need to resist as Christians. And I think we need to ask ourselves, hand on heart, when we read the Gospels, when we read the accounts of Paul and the apostles in Acts, what is dictating their choices, their actions, their preaching, their teaching? What things are kind of causing them to do the thing they do? Is it the desire not to offend, not to
Mm.
upset anyone? Or is it the desire to be faithful to God,
Mm.
to seek his kingdom, and to speak the truth in love?
Mm.
And, it's very clear to me, and I think, if you read, say, the book of Acts, it's very clear that opposition is coming all the time.
Mm.
At times, there's points in Acts where Paul talks about a door has been opened, and yet in the same breath, there's much opposition.
Mm.
It's almost, that's how the thing goes together. And
Mm.
actually, sometimes the gospel advances with that pushback going on simultaneously, with people being dragged off to court
Mm.
and beaten up. And Paul, of course, suffers a catalogue of um, punishments, abuses from his fellow Jews, as well as from the kind of secular kind of Roman courts. So, this idea that Christianity can kind of cozy up to the establishment and just buy in hook, line, and sinker to the sort of the fashionable, trendy, fads of the day, in terms of, what's deemed, what we can talk about and what we can't. I,
Mm.
I just think is so dangerous. And as I say, eventually you're not going to be able to talk about anything.
Yeah.
You're not going to be able to read the Bible. You're not going to be able to mention Jesus, because it's all going to offend someone.
Mm.
Um, like you might get in a kind of totalitarian Islamic dictatorship, it's just going to go that way, but from a kind of hard secularist point of view. So we need to wake up. I,
Mm.
I, I think we need to wake up. We need to ask ourselves, who is it that we are
Yeah.
actually wanting to serve? Who is it that we're wanting to live for? Who is it that we're wanting to obey? Is it the powers that be, or is it Almighty God?
Yep.
Because who am I going to stand before on the last day?
Yeah.
It's not going to be this judge, or it's not going to be this newspaper, or this politician, or this lobby group. It's going to be God. And it's quite clear what God wants us to do as Christians: speak the truth in love, but do the truth, be people of truth.
Mm.
Call a spade a spade. When everyone
Mm.
around you is calling evil good, you need to be the one that says, no, it's evil.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's a massive wake-up call for the church. And I think, to be honest, Dave, to some extent, we need to kind of devote a whole podcast to sort of establishment Christianity, and
Mm.
how, the risk, especially among church leaders, especially among people like Church of England bishops, the pressure to conform, the temptation to just go along with the kind of ideological mood of society is massive, and is very rarely to kind of think outside the box happens less and less, I think. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
as Christians, we need to be aware for sure.
Absolutely. As it says in Romans 12, doesn't it? Be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Do not be conformed any longer to the pattern of this world. And that's what we're faced with. Really, it is a stark decision, as John writes. Friendship with the world is hatred with God, and it is that stark. Which pattern of thinking do we adopt? Which way are we going to go? Whom are we trying to please? And actually, if we let the culture condition our thinking, we'll be trained into thinking that the compassionate thing to do, the loving thing to do, therefore the Christian thing to do is to side with the BBC and the Guardian and all the rest and say, how could we ever imprison Carla Foster? And of course it leaves the innocent, vulnerable babies utterly undefended. Very interesting. This happens pretty frequently for me. Someone comes up, takes me aside and says, look, I really hope, this is someone, when they first hear about our work, they'll say, look, I really hope the way you approach this is compassionate. And my question is often, compassionate towards whom? Are you talking about compassionate towards the babies? And of course, what's on their minds is very rarely the compassion towards the babies, but what they conceive of as compassion towards the mothers. Now, we seek to be compassionate towards both, and I see no conflict there. But it just shows how much the culture's conditioned us when we think compassionate has nothing to do with defending the welfare of babies and has everything to do with speaking in a way that doesn't jar with the culture, that meets people's felt needs and wants where they're at, rather than speaking up for justice and for the protection of those who cannot speak for themselves. And I think actually when we read through the pages of Scripture, the law being full of compassion, being merciful, full of loving kindness, and so on, and actually the word mercy so often refers to showing concern and acting on behalf of the vulnerable and those who are being oppressed and downtrodden. When the Lord has mercy on the fatherless, or cares for the orphan and widow, or attends to the Hebrews in Egypt, it's an act of justice to protect those who are downtrodden. And I think we've drifted a long way from that.
Absolutely. And I think you've got to ask yourself, sometimes it's good to see these things in historical situations. If someone turned around to William Wilberforce and said, well, I hope your anti-slave trade crusade, I hope you're doing it in a way that doesn't offend any of the slave ship owners. I hope you're doing it in a way that just doesn't ruffle any feathers, doesn't tread on any toes. I mean, what sort of a question would that be?
Yeah.
Clearly they've misunderstood the issue, haven't they?
Yeah.
And I think that is essentially what we see here, Dave. It's a misunderstanding of the issue. It's a complete missing of the primary victims. Yes, women are often coerced. Yes, even if a woman does something that she thinks is the right decision, then years or even months later will quickly regret it. So women are being sold short by this. But the primary victims, we have to always remember, are the unborn children whose voice is not heard and who end up being killed in their thousands, just as Lily Foster was.
Absolutely. So the challenge is for us to be people of truth in a culture that is post-truth and where ideology is just reigning. We've got to be people of justice in a culture where justice can be set aside for the feelings, desires, ambitions of in this case actually a minority, really a powerful elite. Will we stand as Christians for truth, for justice in the face of this tide? And actually, will we be as persistent and devoted as the other side? I'm often challenged by the consistency, the hard work, the unity of the pro-abortion lobby. They do not rest. They do not sleep. They work together very effectively. They don't give up. When they get knocked down, they get up and try again. And actually, as the church, do we care as much about saving babies as these guys care about killing babies? And the honest answer has to be no. Currently, no, we don't care as much. We barely lift a finger by comparison. And so I think this whole sorry case represents quite a strong rebuke and challenge to us as the people of God. This is happening on our watch, and we are responsible to a great degree for all of this and for what happens next. Well, we'd better draw stumps there, I think, Tim. But we'll come back to some of those things, and in particular, establishment Christianity and how many of these thought patterns are invading the church and the effect that's having. But thank you, Tim, as ever, for joining me. And thank you, everyone, for listening. Please do, as ever, like, comment, share, subscribe. It's been great to see a bit of interaction on recent videos. Do post your questions and comments. We will try and get to them. And please do share this in particular with any church leaders you're connected with. We'd love to get these messages to more of the people of God. Thank you so much for listening, and have a great week.